I never thought my marriage would unravel over something as stupid as a lost earring. It was a Wednesday evening, the kind of day that slips past without much notice. I came home from work, tired but content, expecting the usual routine, dinner, a bit of TV, maybe a drink before bed. Instead, I found my wife, Emily, standing in front of the mirror, running her fingers through her hair with that distant look she got when something was bothering her. "What's wrong?" I asked, dropping my keys on the counter. She turned, startled, as if she hadn't heard me come in. "Oh, nothing. Just, I lost one of my earrings. The diamond ones you got me for our anniversary." That alone wouldn't have been a big deal, except Emily never lost things. She was meticulous to the point of obsession. Everything had its place. And something about the way she said it, the slight hesitation, the forced casualness, didn't sit right with me. "Where'd you last have them?" I asked, stepping closer. She glanced down at her wrist, where she twisted the ring she always fidgeted with when she was nervous. "I think at work, or maybe at the gym." The gym. That caught my attention. Emily worked out at the same place every morning, had for years. But lately, she'd been spending more time there, extra classes, long showers, lingering goodbyes when I pick her up. I didn't press. Not yet. Dinner was quiet. Emily kept looking at her phone, smiling faintly at something before locking the screen. My gut twisted. That was new. That night, when she went to shower, I did something I'd never done before. I picked up her phone. I knew the passcode. Our anniversary, easy enough. My hands felt clammy as I opened her messages, scanning for anything out of the ordinary. And there it was. A name I didn't recognize. Ryan. "Ryan, missing you already." "Emily, you're terrible. Stop making me blush." "Ryan, can't wait for tomorrow." "Same time?" "Emily, of course. Wouldn't miss it." My heartbeat pounded in my ears. "Tomorrow? Same time?" What the hell was going on? I scrolled up. The messages were light, teasing, playful, but too familiar. Too intimate. They talked about workouts, inside jokes, and then, "Ryan, you looked incredible today. Could hardly focus on my reps." "Emily, haha, stop. You're going to get me in trouble." "Get me in trouble." I stood there, staring at the words, feeling like the floor had disappeared beneath me. When Emily came out of the bathroom, towel wrapped around her, I was still holding her phone. She stopped cold. "What are you doing?" I lifted the screen so she could see. "Who the hell is Ryan?" Her face drained of color. And just like that, my world split in two. Emily's mouth opened, but no words came out. She just stood there, frozen in place, gripping the edge of the towel around her like it was the only thing keeping her from collapsing. I waited, watching, giving her the chance to explain, to tell me that this wasn't what it looked like, that there was some reasonable explanation for why another man was texting her like they were sneaking around behind my back. But she didn't say a damn thing, and that silence told me more than any excuse she could have come up with. My chest felt tight, my hands numb from gripping her phone too hard, but I kept my voice even because if I let my emotions take control, I wasn't sure what I'd do. "Ryan," I said again, slower this time, pressing the screen so the messages scrolled up. "Who the hell is Ryan?" She took a step back, shaking her head, her eyes darting from me to the phone, like she was calculating how bad this looked, like she was scrambling for a way to talk herself out of it. But there was no way out. I wasn't stupid. "He's just a friend from the gym," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "We work out at the same time, and we talk sometimes. That's all." I let out a breath I didn't realize I was holding and nodded, more to myself than to her. A friend. A friend who tells you that you look incredible and can't focus on his workout because of you. A friend who texts you at night when I'm sitting right here in the same damn house. Her face twisted, frustration flashing in her eyes. "You're taking it the wrong way." I laughed, a short, humorless sound. "Oh, I'm taking it the wrong way. Then help me take it the right way, Emily. Help me understand why a man I've never heard of is texting my wife like this, why you're giggling at your phone during dinner, why you suddenly started going to the gym more often and coming home later than usual." She crossed her arms, suddenly on the defensive. "Because I like having friends, Steve. Because I like having someone to talk to who doesn't make me feel like I have to explain myself all the time." I stared at her, feeling something cold settle in my stomach. "So now it's my fault?" That's not what I said. That's exactly what you said. Emily exhaled sharply, running a hand through her damp hair. I didn't cheat on you. I didn't do anything wrong. I don't control who texts me, and I don't have to report every single conversation I have with someone. You're making a big deal out of nothing. A big deal out of nothing. I wanted to believe that. I wanted to be the idiot husband who overreacted to some friendly texts, who jumped to conclusions and made his wife feel guilty for something innocent. But my gut told me otherwise. If it's nothing, I said, my voice dangerously calm, give me your phone. That hit her like a slap. Her entire body went rigid, and she gripped the towel tighter, her knuckles turning white. What? Give me your phone, I repeated. Unlock it and hand it to me. If there's nothing, then there's nothing. I'll believe you, and we'll drop it. She didn't move. Seconds stretched into what felt like an eternity, and with every passing moment, I felt another crack form in whatever trust one had left. If she had nothing to hide, she would have unlocked the damn thing and shoved it in my hands to prove me wrong, to make me feel like an idiot for doubting her. But she didn't. She just stood there, her breathing uneven, her eyes flickering with something that looked a lot like guilt. No, she said finally. No. That was all she needed to say. I nodded again, slower this time, letting that word sink into my skin like a knife. She turned away, as if walking out of this conversation would make it go away, but I wasn't done. How long? She stopped in the doorway, her back to me. How long what? I clenched my jaw, my hands tightening into fists. How long have you been lying to me? She didn't answer right away. I could see her shoulders rise and fall as she took a breath, trying to figure out what to say, how much to admit, how much to hide. A few months, she said finally. The air left my lungs in a sharp exhale. Jesus Christ, Emily. She turned back to face me, her eyes wet but defiant. I never slept with him. That's supposed to make me feel better? I shook my head, running a hand through my hair. You've been sneaking around behind my back for months, lying to my face, and I'm just supposed to be relieved that you didn't fuck him? Her face twisted, like my words had physically hurt her. I didn't want this to happen, but it did. I shot back. It did, Emily, and you let it. You chose this. She wiped at her face, looking away. I didn't plan for it, okay? I didn't wake up one day and decide to start talking to someone else. It just happened. I let out another laugh, bitter and exhausted. Yeah? And what was supposed to happen next? What's the endgame here? Were you just going to keep stringing me along while you had your little gym flirtation on the side? Or were you working your way up to something more? Her silence was all the answer I needed. I grabbed my jacket off the chair and headed for the door. Where are you going? I turned back just long enough to meet her eyes. I need some fucking air. And then I walked out, slamming the door behind me, leaving my marriage hanging in the balance. I drove around for hours without a destination, just letting the road take me wherever it wanted. The streets were mostly empty, the glow of street lights passing over the windshield as I tried to make sense of everything that had just happened. Emily had been lying to me for months, talking to another man behind my back, getting close to him in a way that she hadn't with me in a long time. The worst part was that I hadn't even noticed, or maybe I had and just didn't want to believe it. I wanted to go back to the house, to demand more answers, to scream at her until she admitted the full truth. But I knew that wouldn't get me anywhere. She had already told me enough to break everything between us, but not enough to give me closure. That was what burned the most. At some point, I ended up in front of my brother's house, even though I hadn't planned on going there. Matt was the only person I could think of who wouldn't try to sugarcoat things or tell me to calm down. He and I weren't the type to talk about our emotions, but we always had each other's backs when shit hit the fan. I sat in the car for a few minutes before finally getting out and knocking on his door. It took a moment, but then the porch light flicked on, and Matt appeared in the doorway, squinting at me like he wasn't sure if he was actually seeing me. "The hell are you doing here?" he asked, rubbing a hand over his face. He was wearing an old t-shirt and sweatpants, probably about to go to bed before I showed up. I walked past him without waiting for an invitation and sat down on his couch. "Emily's cheating on me." That woke him up. He shut the door, grabbed a beer from the fridge, and sat down across from me. "You're sure?" I pulled out my phone, opened the screenshots I had taken before I walked out, and handed it to him. He scrolled through them. his expression darkening with every message he read. When he was done, he let out a low whistle and set the phone down on the table. Shit, yeah. He took a sip of his beer and leaned back. She admit to it? Not all the way. She said she never slept with him, but I don't know if I believe that. Matt let out a long breath and shook his head. Even if she didn't, this is still bad. You planning on confronting her again? I don't know. I need to figure out how deep this goes. Matt was quiet for a moment, thinking. Then he reached for his phone and started typing something. You still got that tracking app on her phone? I looked at him, confused. What? He glanced up. The one you installed last year when she lost her phone at the mall. You still have access to it. I had completely forgotten about that. When Emily lost her phone last year, I had installed a GPS tracking app to help locate it in case it ever happened again. She never uninstalled it, and neither did I. My heart started pounding as I pulled out my own phone and opened the app. I clicked on her name, and within seconds, a small dot appeared on the map. She wasn't at home. I turned the screen so Matt could see. She told me she was at home when I called her earlier. But look at this. He frowned and zoomed in on the location. That's a hotel. My stomach dropped. I stared at the screen, the name of the hotel glaring back at me like a confirmation of everything I had been afraid of. Emily hadn't just been texting Ryan. She was meeting him. Matt set his beer down with a thud. You want to go check it out? I didn't even have to think about it. I grabbed my keys, and Matt grabbed his jacket. We were out the door in less than a minute. The drive to the hotel was a blur. My hands were gripping the wheel so tight that my knuckles were turning white, my mind racing with every possible scenario. Maybe there was another explanation. Maybe she was there for some other reason. But deep down, I already knew the truth. When we pulled into the parking lot, I turned off the engine and just sat there, staring at the building. Matt was watching me, waiting for me to decide what to do next. All right, he said finally. How do you want to play this? I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. I just need to see it for myself. If I see her walk out of there with him, that's all the proof I need. Matt nodded and leaned back in his seat. Then we wait. We sat there in silence, watching the entrance, both of us tense and ready for whatever was about to happen. Minutes passed, then an hour. I was starting to wonder if we had missed them when the door finally opened. Emily stepped out first, her hair slightly messy, her clothes not as put together as they had been when she left the house earlier. And right behind her was Ryan. I felt something inside me snap. I reached for the door handle, but Matt grabbed my arm. Think about this for a second, he said firmly. You storm in there now, you're just giving her the chance to turn this on you. You need to be smart. I gritted my teeth, my entire body shaking with anger. I don't care. I just want her to see me. Matt sighed and let go. All right, just don't do anything that's going to land you in jail. I got out of the car, my heart pounding in my ears as I walked across the parking lot. Emily was laughing at something Ryan said, her hand brushing against his arm like it was the most natural thing in the world. Then she looked up and saw me. Her face went pale. Ryan followed her gaze, his expression shifting from amusement to confusion. Who's that? Emily didn't answer. She just stared at me, frozen in place. I took another step forward. Hey, babe. Thought you were at home. Her mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. Ryan looked between us, realization slowly dawning on him. Oh, shit. Yeah. Oh, shit was right. Emily took a half step backward, her body tense like she was deciding whether to run or try to talk her way out of this. Her face was a mess of emotions, shock, fear, maybe even guilt, but none of that mattered. I had her. She couldn't lie her way out of this anymore. Not when I had caught her walking out of a hotel with him. Ryan looked between us, clearly uncomfortable, shifting on his feet like he was trying to figure out if he needed to defend himself or just disappear. The bastard didn't even know who I was, which told me exactly how much Emily had been hiding. You want to tell him who I am, or should I? I asked, my voice calm but cold. Emily swallowed hard, her eyes darting around like she was looking for an escape. Steve, please. Let's not do this here. Ryan frowned. Wait, Steve? Is this your husband? I let out a short laugh, shaking my head. She didn't even tell you she was married? Jesus, that's even worse than I thought. I turned my attention back to Emily, and the way she wouldn't meet my eyes told me everything I needed to know. She had been lying to him, too. Maybe she told him she was separated. Maybe she told him she was leaving me, or maybe she just left me out of the story altogether. Ryan took a step away from her, running a hand through his hair, realization hitting him. You told me you weren't. He stopped himself, then let out a frustrated sigh. You know what? I should have known. This is messed up. I watched as he turned and started walking toward the parking lot, not even bothering to wait for an explanation. Emily's head snapped toward him in panic. Ryan, wait. I took a step forward, blocking her path. No, you don't get to chase after him like I'm the one interrupting something. You don't get to stand here, looking guilty, acting like this is something that just happened by accident. You made a choice, Emily. Multiple choices. And now you get to deal with the consequences. She let out a shaky breath, finally forcing herself to look at me. I was going to tell you. I didn't know how. I stared at her, feeling the anger bubbling just beneath the surface. That's bullshit. You had months to tell me. Instead, you lied every single time I asked where you were, who you were with. You stood in our house, in our bed, and acted like nothing was wrong while you were sneaking around with him. Emily shook her head quickly, tears forming in her eyes. It wasn't like that. It was exactly like that. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. She just stood there, looking like she wanted to say something, like she wanted to find the right words to somehow make this better, but there was nothing she could say that would fix this. Then Matt spoke up from behind me, his voice cutting through the tension. Look, I don't know how much longer you plan on standing here trying to convince Steve this was some kind of misunderstanding, but it's done. You don't get to spin this into something else. You don't get to cry your way out of it. Emily wiped at her face, glaring at Matt now, but she knew he was right. She turned back to me, lowering her voice. Can we just talk? Alone. I let out a slow breath, shaking my head. I don't think there's anything left to say. She reached out for me, but I stepped back before she could touch me. I couldn't let her do that, not now. Her voice cracked. I never meant to hurt you. I looked at her, really looked at her, and for the first time I didn't see my wife. I saw a woman who had made a choice that destroyed everything we had built together. I saw someone who had spent months making me feel like I was crazy for noticing the distance between us, who had gaslit me into believing I was overreacting when I felt like something was wrong. I saw someone who had made the decision, over and over again, to betray me. You did hurt me, I said finally, and you don't get to decide what happens next. You don't. Emily's face crumpled, but I didn't stay to watch. I turned, walked back to my car, and got in. Matt followed, and neither of us said anything as I started the engine and drove away, leaving her standing there in the parking lot, alone with the mess she had created. The drive back to my house was silent. Matt didn't say anything, and I was grateful for it because my head was spinning too much to hold conversation. The reality of what had just happened was sinking in, pressing down on me, making my chest feel tight. There was no fixing this. There was no coming back from what Emily had done, from what I had just witnessed with my own eyes. Maybe if I had never followed her, never checked her phone, never tracked her location, I could have kept living in ignorance for a little while longer, but the truth was out now. There was no going back. I pulled into my driveway, turned off the engine, and just sat there, staring at the house. Matt leaned back in his seat, letting out a long breath. So what now? It was a fair question. My marriage was over, that much was clear, but there were still a million things to figure out. Who was leaving, how we were dividing things, what came next. But right now, all I could focus on was the fact that the woman I had spent years of my life with, the woman I had trusted, had been lying to me for months. I don't know, I admitted. Matt nodded, not pushing me for more. You want me to come in? I shook my head. Nah, I need to deal with this alone. He didn't argue, just patted my shoulder once before getting out. Call me if you need anything. I nodded, watching as he walked to his car and drove away. For a moment, I thought about just staying in the car all night, avoiding the conversation that I knew was coming, but that wasn't an option. I had to face this. I stepped out, walked up to the door, and let myself in. The house was quiet. Emily wasn't here yet, which meant I had a little time to gather my thoughts. I didn't sit down. I just stood there in the living room, looking around at everything we had built together, knowing that by tomorrow, it would all be different. The front door opened 20 minutes later. Emily walked in slowly, her face red from crying, her eyes already locked onto me, like she had been preparing for this moment the entire drive back. She shut the door behind her and hesitated before taking a step closer. "Steve, don't." I cut her off. "Don't start with whatever speech you came up with on the way home. I don't want to hear it." She flinched but nodded, swallowing hard. "Can we just talk?" I let out a breath, running a hand over my face. "There's nothing left to talk about, Emily." "There is," she insisted. "There's so much I need to explain." I let out a bitter laugh. "Explain? You want to explain?" "I don't need an explanation. I don't need to hear why you did it, or what you were thinking, or how it wasn't supposed to happen. I saw enough tonight to know that nothing you say is going to change a damn thing." She took another step forward, desperate now. "Steve, I love you." I stared at her, my chest tightening with anger. "No, you don't." "Yes, I do," she pleaded. "I never stopped loving you." "Then what the hell was tonight?" I snapped. "What was the last few months?" Because love isn't sneaking around behind your husband's back, lying to his face, meeting another man at a hotel. That's not love, Emily. That's selfishness. Tears slipped down her cheeks as she shook her head quickly. I made a mistake. I clenched my jaw, letting out a slow breath to keep myself from yelling. A mistake is forgetting to pay a bill. A mistake is leaving the stove on. This was a choice, and you made that choice over and over again. You didn't just wake up one day and fall into an affair. You built it. You let it grow. You let it happen every time you texted him, every time you lied about where you were, every time you met up with him. She sobbed, covering her face with her hands. I never wanted this to happen, but it did. She looked at me, her entire body trembling. "Can we fix this?" I stared at her for a long time, taking in the broken woman in front of me, the woman who had spent months betraying me, but now wanted to undo it all with a few tears and desperate words. Maybe some men would take their wives back after this. Maybe some would go to therapy, try to rebuild what had been shattered, try to forget what they had seen. But I wasn't one of them. I knew myself, and I knew that even if I wanted to forgive her, even if I wanted to pretend none of this had happened, I never would be able to. It would always be there. Every time she left the house, every time she picked up her phone, every time she smiled at me, I would wonder, I would doubt. And that wasn't a life I was willing to live. "No," I said finally. "We can't." She broke down completely, covering her face as her body shook with sobs, but I didn't move to comfort her. That wasn't my job anymore. "You need to pack a bag," I told her, my voice steady. "I want you out tonight." She lifted her head, her face crumpling in panic. "Steve, please." "I don't care where you go," I said, cutting her off. "Stay with a friend, get a hotel, sleep in your car if you have to. But you're not sleeping here." She wiped at her face, trying to steady herself. "And then what?" "Then I file for divorce." She shook her head violently. No, Steve, please, let's talk about this. Let's figure something out." "There's nothing to figure out," I said. "It's over, Emily." She didn't say anything after that. She just stood there, looking at me like she was waiting for me to change my mind, but I wouldn't. Finally, she turned and walked to the bedroom. I stayed in the living room, listening as she packed, as she cried quietly to herself, as she dragged her suitcase to the door. She turned back one last time, searching my face for any sign that I would stop her, that I would ask her to stay. I didn't. She opened the door, stepped outside, and left. And just like that, my marriage was over.